Welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, we like to go deep, and today we're going deep on a book called Anti-Fragile.
The Rise of Resilience in a World of Overprotection.
Oh yeah, I like that subtitle. It's by Conrad Riker.
Yeah, Conrad Riker. Now, this book,
Yeah.
it's a bit controversial,
Yeah, definitely ruffle some feathers.
but it really makes you think.
Oh, for sure. Makes you think about how we deal with risk and all the challenges in the world today. You know, in a world that feels like it's kind of obsessed with safety.
I think that's one of the most interesting things about this book, this whole idea that Riker calls it safetyism.
Yeah.
That by trying to eliminate all risk and make everything perfectly safe, we might actually be making ourselves weaker.
More fragile.
Yeah, exactly. Less able to bounce back when things inevitably go wrong.
It's counterintuitive,
Yeah.
right? We all want to be safe, of course, but could it backfire? If we try to eliminate every single risk, what happens then?
Right. That's exactly what Riker is getting at. He even uses the term snowflake generation
Yeah.
to describe what he sees as this trend of oversensitivity and fragility, especially among young people. Now, I know that term can be a little loaded.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's important to point out that Riker acknowledges there's a lot of debate about whether this snowflake generation is a real thing or just a stereotype.
Right.
He even shares a story in the book about a student
Yeah, I remember this.
who was supposedly re-traumatized by a scene in The Great Gatsby.
The one with the car accident.
Yes, exactly, to kind of illustrate this perceived oversensitivity.
Yeah, that one made me think for sure. But I kind of get where he's coming from.
Yeah.
You know, have you ever seen those warnings on TV shows? They're like, this program may contain scenes that some viewers may find disturbing.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, come on. Are we really that fragile?
It's interesting, right? And that's really Riker's point. While it's important to be sensitive and empathic,
Of course.
we also have to be careful not to create an environment where people are completely shielded from any kind of discomfort or challenge.
Yeah, like a sterile environment.
Right, because he argues that can actually prevent us from growing,
Right.
from developing resilience.
Like they say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly.
Something like that.
And if we're always protected from the heat, how can we forge ourselves, into something stronger?
Yeah, Riker also talks about the role of helicopter parenting in all of this, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
Like how that contributes to this culture of overprotection.
He sees it as a major factor, where parents are constantly hovering,
Oh, yeah.
shielding their kids from every possible harm.
Every little bump in the road.
Exact. And he has this one anecdote in the book. It's about a mother who texts her child to remind them to wear a hat.
Oh my God.
It's almost comical.
It is.
But it also really highlights this tendency to overprotect.
To prevent kids from experiencing even minor inconveniences.
Yeah, like the slightest bit of discomfort.
It makes you wonder if we're doing more harm than good.
Yeah.
By trying to smooth out all the bumps in the road for our kids.
I think that's a question a lot of parents are grappling with.
Right. Because Riker seemed to think so. He argues that these experiences, even the uncomfortable ones, are essential for developing resilience and grit.
It's about learning to cope with challenges
Right.
and developing the skills to overcome them.
So we need to let kids skin their knees every once in a while.
Metaphorically speaking, of course.
Right, of course. But you get the idea. Now, he also connects this helicopter parenting to the rise of safe spaces on university campuses, which is really interesting.
Yeah, that's a bit of a controversial topic.
Sure.
These spaces are intended to provide support and
Oh,
a
yeah.
sense of belonging.
Right, a place to feel safe.
Exactly. But Riker suggests that they might unintentionally be hindering intellectual growth.
So instead of encouraging open debate
Right.
and the exploration of different viewpoints, could they actually create echo chambers
Potential.
where everyone agrees
Duh.
and uncomfortable truths are just avoided?
It's a possibility that he raises that by limiting exposure to diverse and potentially challenging viewpoints,
Yeah.
these safe spaces could prevent people from developing critical thinking skills. And he even goes a step further
Okay.
and suggests that this desire to protect individuals from emotional distress
Right.
might be connected to the rise of trigger warning.
Now that's a fascinating connection.
Yeah.
Because both safe spaces and trigger warnings come from a good place.
Yeah, I think the intention is good.
Like to protect people.
Right, to create a more inclusive and supportive environment.
But Riker seems to be suggesting there could be unintended consequences
Right.
to these well-intentioned efforts.
Exactly. He acknowledges the arguments for trigger warning,
Right.
which are intended to alert people to potentially distressing content.
Of course, so they can prepare themselves.
Exactly. But he's also concerned that they might create this kind of binary view of right and wrong, where there's no room for nuance or complexity, and that this could actually stifle meaningful conversation.
Like shut down dialogue.
Yeah, and potentially even exacerbate societal division.
It's a tough balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to protect people while also encouraging open dialogue and critical thinking.
It's a complex issue for sure.
It reminds me of that example Riker gives about the English literature professor
Oh, yeah.
who got criticized for assigning text that dealt with sexual assault without trigger warning.
It's a perfect example of the complexity.
Right.
On the one hand,
You have the professor's right to academic freedom and the importance of exposing students to challenging literature.
right, it's a different perspective.
But on the other hand,
You have the potential for triggering trauma
Right.
and causing real emotional distress.
it's a real dilemma.
It is.
And it speaks to this larger issue that Riker's trying to address in the book. How do we navigate a world
Yeah.
where we're constantly trying to eliminate risk and discomfort?
It's a question we all have to grapple with.
And what are the costs of this approach? Maybe even more important.
Right. What are we sacrificing in the pursuit of safety?
And that's where Riker's concept of overregulation and litigation culture comes in,
Ah, yes.
which is fascinating. He argues that this fear of lawsuits
Yeah.
and the desire to avoid any potential harm is actually stifling innovation and risk-taking, not just in education, but in society as a whole.
I think he's onto something there.
He even cites James Hollingworth from Harvard University,
Okay.
who questions whether schools are inadvertently handicapping children by aligning with this helicopter parent culture.
It's an interesting question, right? Are we creating a generation that's so used to being protected that they're afraid to take risks and face challenges head on?
It's a scary thought. But on the other hand, isn't seeking comfort a natural human instinct?
That's the paradox. We're wired for survival.
So seeking comfort and safety makes sense.
Absolutely. From an evolutionary perspective, it's essential.
But where do we draw the line? How much comfort is too much?
That's the million-dollar question.
And that's what we'll be exploring further in this deep dive into anti-fragile.
It's like we're constantly trying to optimize for comfort.
Right.
And eliminate any potential for pain or discomfort.
Which makes sense on the surface.
Right. It's natural to want to avoid those things.
Nobody wants to be uncomfortable.
But Riker suggests that by constantly prioritizing comfort,
Okay.
we might actually be undermining our own resilience in the long run.
So a little discomfort and risk might actually be good for us.
That's the paradox he's exploring.
It's kind of a mind-blowing idea.
It is.
Right.
Riker uses this analogy of the Goldilocks effect,
Okay, I like that.
where you need just the right amount of stress to thrive.
Not too little.
Exactly.
Like finding that sweet
Yeah,
spot.
and he argues that by constantly trying to eliminate all stress and discomfort,
Yeah.
we're actually making ourselves more vulnerable.
More fragile.
Yeah, more fragile to the inevitable challenges that life throws our way.
Because stress is a part of life.
It's unavoidable.
Right. So it's not about eliminating it completely.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about learning to manage it
Right. To build up that resilience.
and to use it to our advantage.
I'm starting to see the connection to his anti-fragile concept here.
Yeah.
It's not about being invincible or anything.
Right.
But about being able to bounce back.
From adversity.
Yeah. And maybe even grow stronger from those experiences.
That's the key. It's not just about surviving challenges. It's about actually benefiting from them.
Like turning those challenges into opportunities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Using them as fuel for growth.
Okay, I like that. So it's not about avoiding stress altogether,
No.
but about finding that right amount
Sweet spot. The Goldilocks zone.
and using it to our advantage.
To make ourselves stronger, more resilient.
Now, he also delves into the role of fathers in shaping resilient children, which is fascinating.
That's one of the things I found most interesting about the book.
Yeah, because I always thought roughhousing was just kids being kids,
It's just play.
a way to burn off energy. But Riker sees it as something deeper.
Much deeper. He actually argues that it's crucial for development.
Wait, really? Like dads wrestling with their kids, playing tag, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's actually beneficial.
According to Riker, yes. He pushes back against the idea that rough play is harmful.
Interesting.
And he cites research from psychologists like Dr. Anthony Pellegrini and Dr. Peter Gray,
Okay.
who argue that it's actually vital for physical, emotional, and mental development.
So it's not just about having fun.
No, it's about learning important life skills.
So what kind of skills are kids developing through rough and tumble play?
Well, for one thing, it helps them develop physical boundaries.
Okay, like understanding their own physical limits.
Exactly. And respecting the limits of others.
Right, which is huge.
It also helps them learn how to regulate their emotions.
Okay, because things can get heated during roughhousing.
Right. Emotions run high.
But they have to learn to manage those emotions.
Exactly. And it helps them navigate social interaction.
Like learning how to cooperate.
Yeah, how to compete, how to resolve conflict.
It's like a real world training ground for resilience.
That's a great way to put it.
It's amazing how something as simple as rough and tumble play can have such a profound impact on development.
Riker argues that it's actually one of the most important things we can do for our kids.
So we should be encouraging it,
Within reason, of course.
right? Obviously, we don't want anyone getting hurt.
But Riker's point is that we shouldn't be afraid of a little roughhousing.
It's a natural part of childhood.
Exactly. And it's essential for building resilience.
Okay, so rough and tumble play, good for kids. Got it. Now, he also makes another important point in the book about the importance of unstructured play.
Ah, yes. That's another key theme.
He argues that overscheduling kids putting too much pressure on them to succeed.
Right, like the whole tiger mom phenomenon.
Exactly. He thinks it can actually backfire.
Yeah, he believes it stifles their creativity,
Okay.
their adaptability, and ultimately their resilience.
So less structured activities, more time for free play.
Let kids just be kids.
Makes sense. But it seems like we're moving further and further away from that model.
I agree. There's this pressure to optimize every moment of childhood.
Right.
To get kids ahead.
Like they have to be super achievers.
Exactly. But Riker argues that this approach can actually be detrimental in the long run.
So what does he suggest instead?
Well, he uses the example of Richard Branson,
Okay.
the entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And he highlights how Branson's childhood play experiences actually contributed to his later success.
Interesting.
He believes that play is essential for developing crucial skills.
Like what kind of skills?
Problem solving, critical thinking, risk taking, all those things that are essential for success in life.
So play isn't just about having fun.
No, it's about developing essential life skills.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. Play, risk-taking, resilience.
It's all connected.
But how do we strike a balance? How do we foster this anti-fragile mindset in our kids while also keeping them safe? I mean, the world is a dangerous place.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Riker acknowledges that safety is important,
Of course.
but he argues that we need to find a balance
Okay.
between protecting children and allowing them to take risks and experience the world.
So it's not about eliminating risk altogether,
No.
but about teaching them how to navigate it.
Exactly. It's about equipping them with the skills and the mindset they need to handle challenges.
So less bubble wrap and more real-world experiences.
That's a good way to put it.
But how do we do that in a culture that's become so risk-averse?
That's the challenge.
Right. It's like we're all so afraid of something bad happening.
Yeah, it's like we've lost sight of the fact that a little bit of risk is actually healthy.
Essential even.
Exactly.
So how do we shift that mindset? How do we convince a society that's become so risk-averse to embrace this anti-fragile approach?
Well, Riker suggests we need to start by challenging the prevailing narrative.
Okay, so changing the story, we tell ourselves about risk and safety,
Exactly. We need to question the assumption that the world is becoming more dangerous.
which is not necessarily,
Right.
Wait.
Right. Statistically speaking, we live in one of the safest times in human history.
but it doesn't always feel that way.
No, because we're constantly bombarded with information about all the things that could go wrong.
The 24/7 news cycle, social media, it's a lot.
It is, and it can create this sense of anxiety and fear.
That the world is a scary place.
Exactly.
We need to push back against that narrative.
And start emphasizing the benefits of resilience and adaptability.
Okay, so instead of focusing on what we need to be protected from,
Right.
we focus on what we need to be equipped for.
Exactly. It's about building up our capacity to handle whatever life throws our way.
Instead of trying to prevent everything bad from happening.
Because we can't prevent everything.
Right. Life is unpredictable.
Exactly. And that's okay.
So how do we do that? How do we build up that resilience?
Well, Riker suggests a few things.
Okay, I'm all ears.
First, he encourages cultivating what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's about believing that your abilities aren't fixed.
Right.
What you can always learn and grow,
Exactly. It's about embracing challenges as opportunities for growth.
rather than seeing them as threats.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's about changing our perspective on challenges.
Yeah. It's about seeing them as opportunities to learn and improve.
I like that. So how do we cultivate a growth mindset?
Well, it starts with being aware of our self-talk.
The things we tell ourselves.
It's exact. And then challenging those negative thoughts.
Like when we say things like, I'm not good at this.
Right. Or I'll never be able to do that.
We need to catch ourselves doing that.
And replace those thoughts with more positive and empowering ones.
Like, I can learn this, or I'm going to get better at this.
Exactly.
Oh, I can see how that would be helpful. But it takes effort,
It does. But it's worth it.
right? Because it's about changing our mindset
Which can then change our behavior.
and ultimately our outcome.
Exactly. It's a
Yeah.
powerful tool.
Okay, so growth mindset, check. What else does Riker suggest?
He also talks about the importance of stress inoculation.
Stress inoculation. That sounds intense.
It's a fascinating concept.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
What exactly does it mean?
Well, Riker suggests that exposure to controlled amounts of stress,
Controlled amounts.
right, can actually make us stronger and more resilient.
Wait a minute. So a little stress can actually be a good thing.
That's what he's arguing.
It's not all bad.
No, he distinguishes between distress,
Okay.
which is negative and harmful.
Right, like chronic stress.
Exactly.
That could be really damaging.
And then there's eustress,
Eustress.
which is positive and motivating.
Okay, so like the stress we feel when we're challenged.
Right, or when we're pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone.
But it's a good kind of stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Riker argues that eustress can be a powerful driver of growth and development.
So how do we find that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone of stress? It seems like we're constantly bombarded with stressors in today's world.
That's true. It's a challenge.
Right.
But Riker suggests that finding the right balance is key.
Okay, so not too much stress, not too little.
Exactly. Too much stress can lead to burnout.
Right, we've all been there.
But too little stress can lead to complacency and stagnation,
So we need to find that middle ground,
where we're challenged.
but not overwhelmed.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we find that balance?
Well, it's about being intentional about the types of stress we expose ourselves to.
Okay, so choosing our battles, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's also about making sure we have adequate recovery time.
Like downtime,
Exactly. Time to rest and recharge.
because we can't be on all the time.
Right. We need to give ourselves permission to step back and recover.
Okay, makes sense. So stress inoculation, another tool for building resilience.
Exactly. Riker believes it's essential for thriving in an unpredictable world.
Okay, so we've got growth mindset, we've got stress inoculation. What else does Riker suggest?
Well, he also talks about the importance of embracing failure.
Oh yeah, failure. That's a tough one.
It is. It's something that a lot of us try to avoid.
You know, nobody likes to fail.
But Riker argues that failure is actually an essential part of the learning process.
Okay, so we need to reframe our relationship with failure.
Exact. Instead of seeing it as something to be ashamed of,
Right.
we need to see it as an opportunity to learn and grow.
Like that saying, fail forward.
Exact. It's about learning from our mistakes,
And using those lessons to improve.
to become more resilient.
So we shouldn't be afraid to take risks.
Within reason, of course.
Right.
But we shouldn't let the fear of failure hold us back.
Because if we're not failing,
We're probably not pushing ourselves hard enough.
we're not growing.
Exactly.
Okay, so embrace failure.
Got it.
Now, Riker also talked about the importance of finding your purpose.
Ah, yes. That's another key theme in the book.
He argues that having a sense of purpose can actually make you more resilient.
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, when you have a clear sense of purpose,
Okay.
you're more likely to persevere in the face of challenges.
Because you have something to fight for.
Exactly. You have a reason to keep going even when things get tough.
It gives you that motivation.
It gives you that sense of meaning.
Right. So finding your purpose is important.
It's essential.
But how do you do that?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Like, how do you figure out what your purpose is?
Well, Riker suggests that it's about exploring your values,
Okay.
your interests, your passions.
So what are you passionate about?
Exactly. What makes you feel
Oh, right. What gets you excited?
Those are the clues
Okay.
to what your purpose might be.
And it's a journey.
It is.
It's not something you just figure out overnight.
Right. It takes time and exploration.
Okay. So find your purpose. Another key to building resilience.
Absolutely.
Now, Riker also talks about the importance of community.
Ah, yes. That's another crucial element.
He argues that having strong social connections can make you more resilient in the face of stress and adversity.
It's true. We're social creatures.
Right. We need each other.
We're not meant to go through life alone.
So what kind of social connections are we talking about here?
Well, it could be family,
Okay.
friends, colleagues, neighbors, even online community.
Right. So it's about having people you can rely on,
Exact people who support you,
people who have your back.
people who make you feel connected.
Okay, that makes sense. So community, another important piece of the resilience puzzle.
Absolutely.
So we've got a lot of tools here for building resilience, growth mindset, stress inoculation, embracing failure, finding your purpose, building community.
It's a holistic approach.
Right. It's not just one thing.
It's about addressing all aspects of your life.
To make yourself more resilient
You're anti-fragile.
so you can thrive in an unpredictable world.
Exact.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into anti-fragile.
I agree. It's a thought-provoking book.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
And I hope it's done the same for you, our listener.
I hope so.
If you're interested in learning more about these ideas, I highly recommend checking out Riker's book for yourself.
You can find Anti-Fragile on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's a challenging read, but it's well worth the effort.
I think anyone who's feeling overwhelmed by the complexities of modern life
Yeah,
will find something valuable in this book.
I agree. It's a reminder that we're not powerless in the face of adversity,
We have the power to make ourselves stronger,
more resilient,
more anti-fragile.
and ultimately to thrive no matter what life throws our way,
That's the key. It's about embracing the challenges
and using them to our advantage.
to become the best versions of ourselves.
Well said. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And to our listener, thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay anti-fragile.